Rod Hore from HHMC. Good morning. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you, and pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you very much for being involved in Recruitment Journeys, the podcast series. It's our second series. We're kind of well into the second series, and it's obviously a very interesting and topical time, and the conversations have naturally started to gravitate towards this global pandemic that we find ourselves in, Rod. And very keen to get your views on how this, excuse my French, this shitstorm is affecting our wonderful industry. So thank you for being involved.
No, it's a pleasure. I've been listening to your podcast, so I'm really pleased to be on here.
Thank you. So look, before we get into it, Rod, I've already, before we went live, given the listeners and the viewers a little bit of an introduction into who Rod Hore is. But in your own humble words, would you mind letting us know who you are, Rod?
Okay. Well, I founded HHMC in 1999, which doesn't seem 21 years ago, but here we are. And spend my time within the recruitment industry. I live in Perth, and still have full of energy and enthusiasm when I get up in the morning.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, you're a household name in the recruitment industry. I knew all about you years before I had the privilege to chat with you. So you're a well-known man. You're an expert in our space, and I think this conversation is going to be invaluable. And we're going to focus on a couple of different areas. Particularly what's happened as a result of COVID. The spin-off. The potential growth. The startups and the new businesses that are spinning out of COVID. Before we get into that, Rod, would you mind explaining what HHMC, your business, actually does?
Yeah, so we're best known and we spend most of our time involved in merger and acquisition transactions. So we work with sellers to help them divest their business, but we also work with buyers who are looking to expand their business through acquisition. And we're fortunate enough that a lot of our activity has some international flavour to it. So about 50% of our activity has some international relationship to it. So while we're deeply embedded across Australia and New Zealand, we also work strongly internationally and have a really good connection base around. And I'm particularly excited about what Brexit is going to bring the Australian recruitment industry. So the UK-Australia connection, I think, is really strong, and looking forward to that growing over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I read an article, and I'm sure you're more across this than I, which said that because Brexit has essentially evaporated a lot of kind of trans-Euro working business relationships, that they need to find some allies, and Australia is the obvious one. Which means it will make it, nothing's been set in stone yet, but it will make it easier for UK recruiters to work in Australia, and vice versa.
The free trade agreement, the formal free trade agreement between the UK and Australia is now an official thing and is being negotiated, and they hope to finalise that as soon as possible. So I think that'll have great benefit for the recruitment industry.
Oh, that's exciting. That's good news. So we're off to a good start, Rod. We're already spitting out the good news. So, mate, just in case anybody hasn't heard of Recruitment Journeys, I'll very quickly explain what the podcast is all about. Recruitment Journeys, as it says on the tin, it's about talking to chosen identities in our wonderful industry and listening to their story in the hope that it might educate, inform, inspire, motivate people listening. You're a little bit different, Rod, because you're not a recruiter per se, but like I said earlier, you're very well known in our industry. Would you mind telling the listeners and the viewers how you found yourself 21 years ago to actually be working in and focusing on the recruitment industry?
Yeah, look, I was working in the IT industry, and my last real job, as my wife describes it, was working for a US company as an IT services person. I was based in Sydney at that point, and decided that wasn't what I wanted to continue to do. So formed HHMC, and our goal was to do merger and acquisition activity in the IT services space. And I think I hadn't realised how many people I knew in the recruitment industry. 1999 was a very, very buoyant time. This was the sort of the height of the .com and Y2K. So there was a lot of activity in play. And almost immediately, recruiters started tapping on the door and saying, can you help us? Because there's nobody helping us in the recruitment industry from a merger and acquisition perspective. And so it wasn't the business plan, but that's what we started doing. And after about 5 years, we dropped everything else that we'd actually planned to do and focused purely on the recruitment industry. And that's what we do today.
Were you guys, were HHMC literally the first M&A specialists operating in the recruitment field in Australia?
I think so. I don't think I think it was a little bit accidental if anybody did anything in recruitment up until that point. And and we decided that we'd really focus on it and build our brand in that market.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So look, you just said that 1999 was a good time. It was a buoyant market, plenty of M&A activity. But I think the same can also be said, if you agree, pre-COVID. You know, the last 2, 3, 4 years have been really buoyant and active times in the M&A space, in the recruitment industry. How would you describe the last few years, Rod, from an M&A perspective?
Yeah, from an M&A perspective, it was obviously buoyant, and that continued on from sort of 2013, 2014. There was just this almost increase in enthusiasm for growth by acquisition, and so that's great for us. However, it's fair to say that over the last year or two of that, so 2017, 18 maybe, it got a little bit out of hand in that everybody thought they were worth more than they were worth. People were maybe not doing things because of really strong business plans, but doing things because they thought they could make money out of it. And so things start to go a little bit off balance at that point. But certainly, that the last decade has been great for a merger and acquisition perspective, because there's been a lot of activity. In that period, we've had the Japanese arrive, we've had a lot of interest from North America, we've had a lot of interest from different parts of Asia, or emerging interest from Asia. And of course, the UK connection is always strong in Australia. So it's been a great decade if you put it all together.
It's been okay. We've had a good run. We've had a good run. And it's interesting because during this good run, I've heard multiple business owners, and I don't know whether you've actually said it yourself. I'll find out in a second. But I've heard multiple business owners, the people that you wouldn't expect to say it, say things like, we need a recession, we need the bubble to burst, we need a downturn. Me being I'm not necessarily I'm not an economical guy. I just think, well, that's the worst thing you could possibly say. That's the last thing we need. Why would people say that, Rod? Why do people suggest it's a good thing to have a downturn or the bubble to burst?
Yeah, it is an interesting one, and I probably have said it in the past, but probably not in public, because with the obvious connotations of it, you're trying to wish bad on people, and you're not doing that. But things do get out of kilter, and you could take all sorts of examples of how the pendulum swings too far in one direction, and it takes a change to sort of bring it back and reset everything so that you can actually go again. And you could be really cynical about that, but you could look at things like, outsourcing versus insourcing. So, at some point, outsourcing will be the trend, and then people will decide that's not a good thing, and they'll start to insource business and build their business back up, the capability back up within their organization. And so lots and lots of things become sort of the pendulum swings one way and another. And Australia's been very, very lucky. I mean, we've basically had 30 years of continuous growth in the country. The GFC was not a sharp and it was not a long and prolonged downturn like it was in other countries. It was very short, 1 or 2 quarters, and everybody was back in business. And so lessons were not necessarily learned during that period. So from a recruitment industry point of view, we've had 20 years pretty well of continuous growth, even though there's been some ups and downs in that period. And so lots of things get out of sync. People's don't change the model because they're making money. staff costs get a little too high, maybe leadership gets a little lazy, maybe the overheads get a bit bloated, maybe the balance sheet doesn't get looked after as much as it should in terms of debt and savings and investment capability. So all of those things eventually need a waking up moment, and we're certainly having one at the moment.
We certainly are.
You don't wish it on anybody, but you know, but eventually you've got to reset and get a little bit more disciplined, and everything goes in cycles, and we're in the middle of one of those down cycles at the moment.
Yeah. They say be careful what you wish for, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So we got that reset. We got that bubble bursting. Probably not in the way anybody would want. But it's one thing to have a global recession, but obviously there's the huge cost to the human race as well, which none of us wanted.
But every recession, you can sit in the middle of it and say, well, nobody saw that coming, and that's true. Nobody could see banks collapsing. Nobody can see, Y2K, fall off in 2001, and so on and so on and so on. And sometimes it's localized and related to a country, but in this instance, it's a global activity, and that's pretty unusual, I think.
The only person who saw this coming was Bill Gates, wasn't he? About 5 years ago, he prophesied this, genius that he is. Okay, so it's happened. It's hit us like a speeding bullet, and we're in it. So I suppose I'm keen to find out your thoughts on the impact on the industry, and I suppose the impact on the value to businesses. I've got a friend, good friend, old friend, who's run a very successful business in London for 8 or 9 years, and started it literally from his kitchen table with his first employee, and has built it to an absolute beast of a business, phenomenally successful across the UK and the States. And he was taking his business to market this year. This year he was going to sell it, and he's very pragmatic and philosophical about everything. He said, look, it's just a major inconvenience. We're all still healthy. We've all got jobs to a degree, he said, but it just delays everything. We all wanted to sell up and enjoy our money and go and sit on the beach next year, but we're probably going to be doing that in 3 or 4 years' time. And, and we will bounce back. But there is damage to his business. There is damage to the value of pretty much every recruitment business, not every recruitment business, but 90% of recruitment businesses across Australia. What do you think is the main issue and damage incurred to the recruitment businesses in Australia today?
Well, that's a multifaceted one. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there about what valuations are at the moment. And so sort of going back and being really boring for a moment, but valuations are made up of, first of all, having some sort of a multiple of profit that you agree to. Which implies, of course, that you can talk about your profit, because multiple hasn't necessarily changed, but profit has. People are earning less, delivering less profit today than they were. Then there is the structure of a transaction and where the risk sits in the transaction, and that's a negotiated outcome between the buyer and the seller. And at the moment, and I'll come back and explain that, but at the moment, the risk all sits with the seller, not with the buyer. And then there's the balance sheet items, there's the working capital that is in the business, and what happens to that and how that is handled in the transaction. And so we're a little bit controversial by saying that we don't think multiples change over time. So what a multiple was 10 years ago is probably what a multiple is today in round terms. What does go up and down is profit. So over the last 10 years, people have grown their profit, and they say, my business is worth more than it was before. Well, it's actually worth the same. It's just your profit's a bit bigger. And then the structure of the deal is the one that people don't stop and think about. And today, people will be, if you're trying to sell your business today, you have difficulty with your past results, and you can't forecast your future results. So therefore, if you're going to sell your business, nobody's going to pay a lot of money up front for that. They're actually going to give you some sort of a future earnings component. So in other words, the risk sits with the seller. So in good times, there's some balance of that, and it probably sits a bit more towards benefiting the seller. But at the moment, genuinely benefits the buyer. So deals can be done, transactions can be done. They can be done at the multiples approximately that they would have been done a year ago, but the risk sits with the seller. And you know, the challenge is nobody can forecast right at this moment what's going to come out of this. So nobody can sit there and say, this is what my revenue and profit is going to be for the next 3 months or the next 6 months. And we're a little way away from being able to have that confidence to do that.
And are deals still being done, Rod? Are recruitment businesses still being bought and sold?
Yeah, I mean, just speaking from HHMC's experience over the last few months, I mean, you can probably imagine that a lot of our transactions, a lot of our projects that we had underway stopped, but not all of them stopped. And we've won new work since this started. And there are lots and lots of reasons why a company might need to do something at the moment. And so we're actually, I won't say we're flat out because there's so many external things going on in the marketplace at the moment, but we've got projects on and we're working towards projects, and we're, you know, occasionally even earning a little bit of revenue, which is nice.
Okay.
So, right, so like the recruitment industry is not dead. I mean, there's activity happening. The M&A market is not dead, but it's certainly reduced from what it was.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So let's put ourselves in the shoes of a business that's been going gangbusters for the last 6, 7, 8 years, and they were gearing up for sale, and then this has happened. What measures should they be putting in place during COVID to, you know, to control damage, to, you know, to stem the flow of blood and
that's a really, really interesting question, because you know, we're not out of this yet. I mean, we've got a long way to go to get back to where people are confident about their future earnings. And because there's time involved, that means you've got to be a little bit risk averse in terms of making sure that you actually get to the point where the market comes through this. So one of my concerns is that people haven't cut enough. They've actually just been delaying decisions. And what I mean by that is that, you know, when the panic first happened, quite rightly, people made quite big decisions, and they should have made quite big decisions. They should have pulled their business down to try and match what their expenditure was and what their revenue was, so that they could survive the period. And that may have meant they let some people go. They probably applied for JobKeeper. They probably put people on reduced hours and so on. But in some of those things is actually just delaying decisions that they're going to have to make in the near future. So people are already starting to talk about, and I'm really pleased they're starting to talk about, the end of JobKeeper. How are you going to survive the end of JobKeeper? Because if you've kept everybody on, but on reduced hours, and they're being paid through JobKeeper, what are you going to do when JobKeeper goes away? So that's a big decision. But that's immediately followed by our summer holidays, so our dip and our move into the Christmas period. And then you've got BAS to pay in February. And so you know, so if you think out over the next 3 quarters, there's actually a lot of points that you've got to get through. So if you can't sit there today and say, worst case scenario, I can survive until March, then you've got more decisions to make. So my concern is actually people that haven't made enough decisions and haven't cut deep enough and haven't done the hard analysis, the brutal analysis required to get through to March, because that's when they can probably start to make a go forward position. Now that sounds really harsh. There are others who may have cut too far and too harshly. And that's probably to do with leadership, and that's probably to do with the ability to go through this, and the resilience and the plan and the capability of the leadership team or the owners of the business. And so they've just shrunk back into a very, very small basis. And maybe that's the right thing to do if they don't trust their own ability to actually fight their way through this. So, you know, it's a very personal thing. It's the leadership team, the owners need to take this from their own circumstances. And there's a lot of things that we don't see from the outside. So you might have a business owned by 3 people, and there's a great divergence of opinion about what the plan is and how they're going to go forward. We don't see that in the marketplace unless you're actually talking to that company. Or there may be some issues on the balance sheet. There might be some loans that all of a sudden can't be funded, or other activity on the balance sheet that's having a non-business related impact on how they're going about things during this period. So all of the circumstances will come out, and, you know, companies will have to make their own individual decisions and do them soon. You know, don't wait 3 months, but get in there and do that analysis and make decisions.
It has been so fascinating observing how businesses have all dealt with this in a different variety of ways. And who knows who's right and who's wrong. We just don't know. But, you know,
and you and I have the opportunity to talk to a lot of business owners, and, you know, and so we're privy to a lot of information about individual companies, but that's not necessarily a trend. I mean, there's everything on the spectrum is available as an option for business owners, and everybody's sitting in a different spot.
Yeah. And a big story in the industry, certainly from a rec to rec perspective, is, you know, a lot of people are kind of voicing their opinions, stroke concerns about how they as employees have been handled during COVID, and how their bosses have managed COVID in terms of their employment and their working hours and their salary cuts and all this stuff. So, you know, there are some disgruntled recruiters out there who are, you know, sitting tight and probably just waiting to see out the storm. But you know, I think there'll be an influx of recruiters hitting the market at some point in the not too distant future.
Yeah, look, I think I think the wind down of JobKeeper will be a massive impact on the recruitment industry. I think there'll be a lot of people having to make a lot more decisions, and, you know, who knows what that will lead to, but it's going to be complex. And look, there's a lot of business owners who have not had to deal with anything adverse in their business in their life, and so from a legal point of view, whether it's in the way they're handling their employees or the way they're dealing with the tax office or the whatever it may be, I'm sure there's all sorts of rules being broken, and a lot of that's going to have to be fixed up as we go forward. But it leaves a bad trail, and as you say, some staff have been treated poorly, which is disappointing.
Yeah. Which leads us nicely onto our next point, because there are some recruiters who've already broken away. They've already said, actually, no, I don't like the way my boss has handled this situation, so I'm breaking away. Or there's some recruiters who've found themselves on the market voluntarily or involuntarily. And what we've seen, which is probably the last thing you'd expect to see, is a whole load of little new mini recruitment businesses popping up.
Yep.
And kudos to those people, to start a recruitment business in the middle of, you know, what is the worst downturn we've ever seen since the Great Depression, apparently. Kudos to them. But they're out there having a crack. What would be your advice to those people who've taken that leap of faith to launch a recruitment business during COVID? What would be your top tips?
Well, I mean, the 30,000 foot positive thing is that a lot of great recruitment companies are forged during downturns. And even if they were an average little recruitment company and entered this period and had a lot of tough times, a lot of existing recruitment companies will come out of this very strong. But a lot of good recruitment companies are forged during downturns, because they, they're having to put a lot of values in place as an organization as they start up, and they remember those values going forward, and they are good for them. There is also a joke, of course, to say that nobody goes on gardening leave anymore. They become a recruitment consultant, or start a recruitment business. So, there's a lot of people who do start recruitment businesses that maybe are not in it for the long term, and maybe they'll go and do something else in 3 years' time or 2 years' time. So it's a temporary home for some people. But one of the bits of advice we give to people who are starting up a recruitment business is that they will never be tested as much as they're about to be, and they don't know everything going into this, because if they knew everything, they'd never start it. But they don't know everything that they need to do in the future, and so therefore they've got to have really good foundations in place. And there's two components to that. I mean, one is what is the purpose of starting the business? I mean, you've got to have a vision or a goal or a purpose of why you're trying to do this. Because if you don't have some sort of driving force or some, knot in your stomach that you're trying to, that's giving you that attention and drive, then you probably won't succeed. So those who just say, oh, I can take home more of my earnings, that's probably not enough purpose. You've got to have some other reason in there that's driving you to do this activity. And in doing that, you've probably got to spend more time analyzing yourself and understand what it is that drives you and what your strengths are and what you're not that good at and where you're going to get assistance. So you've got to work on the things that you're good at, and you've got to find a way of getting the other stuff done, because the other stuff always needs to be done. And you would hope that anybody who's starting a recruitment business is actually quite good at winning their own work, because in the first period of time, there is nobody else to do it but you, and you're going to be tested in that area. There's an old rule of thumb that the first 20 million of sales needs to come from the founder. So if you're not up for that, maybe you should go and find something else, or find some partners who you're going to work with. And so that sort of purpose for the business and knowing yourself and knowing what you're capable of and knowing what your weaknesses are, that can't be overstated enough. Those are just critical to getting on with it, because especially in the early years, a business is all about the founders. It's very personal. Okay. It's where I disagree with the Godfather movies. It is personal. Business is personal.
I've actually been approached maybe three times in the last month from people saying, I'm thinking about doing this, I'm thinking about taking the plunge. And the conversation I have with them is probably not as detailed as you've outlined, but the question I'm always intrigued to ask them is, what do you want to do? Do you want a lifestyle business working on your own? Or do you want to grow a business? Because whichever it is, it's probably a lot harder than you think. People think, oh yeah, we're going to be the next Randstad or Hayes, and we'll have 10 people working for us by the end of the first year. But they fail to think about the fact that no good recruiter generally wants to work for a startup, or generally wants to work for a one-man band. So that's going to be harder than you realise. Have you given that enough thought? Yeah. And a lot of people think, yeah, I can be a one-man band. Everything that I build goes straight to my pocket. I can go to the gym when I want. I can go for coffee whenever I want. Work-life balance. Go to the beach on a Friday afternoon. And I say to those people, because I've been in those shoes. Now I am a one-man band, and I've got 16 years of experience of working on my own. There are plenty. I actually think the negatives outweigh the positives of working on your own. I'm saying that because I'm long in the tooth, but the novelty soon wears off. And it's isolated. It's lonely. Nobody cares whether your business is successful other than you. There's nobody to share the highs with. There's nobody to share the lows with. There's nobody to bounce off. There's nobody to get advice from. People don't think about that. People just think that they're going to be loaded and cashed up, but they don't think about the negatives.
Yeah, and a lot of that is that they've never really evaluated their personal self, and what they want out of work and how they like to work and all of those sort of things. And there's some harsh lessons in there, and usually it takes a few scars to be able to work all that out.
Okay. All right. Well, it'd be very interesting to see how all these new startups go. I hope they survive. I hope they thrive. I hope they flourish. And who knows? Some of the spin outs of COVID might be the next household names in the recruitment industry. I hope.
Look, and that is one of the really nice things. Is that I get very, very excited about what is going to come out of this. So we could go through and talk about a checklist for startups and everything. Maybe I'll give you some bullet points you could send around to people who want it or something. But the opportunity for companies to put in the hard work now and get a strategy and have a purpose and have a real goal of what they're trying to achieve, and then ride the recovery out of this is very, very exciting for the industry and for a lot of individuals. Yeah.
I keep talking about silver linings of COVID, and that is one of them. This new breed of recruitment businesses coming through, and and the new ways that recruitment is going to be done. Everybody's got an opinion on what the recruitment industry is going to look like after COVID. And everybody keeps saying it's not going to be the same. How do you think, Rod, the industry will be different when the fog lifts in, as you say? And I will hold you to this, Rod. You've promised the industry we're going to be okay in March. So we'll hold you to that. So in March,
I can't see any bumps past March. That is what I'll say.
As long as there's no more spikes. Yeah, well, how is the industry going to be different when the fog lifts in 2021?
Yeah, look. Part of me is cynical. Okay, so all of the forecasts from people like staffing industry analysts and that is that the 2021 numbers will be a significant rise on the 2020 numbers in terms of the overall industry revenue, and but it won't return to 2019. So there's no V shape in this. We're in for a fairly long haul to get back to where we were in 2019. So it will look great because it's it's an increase on where it was previously, but yeah. But what do I see changing in the industry? I think those organisations that were doing lazy recruitment in a very active market have been found out, and that's not what clients want. And I think people need to listen to clients more. And so therefore the models about RPO and statement of work and, genuine partnership and genuinely adding value with niche talent pools and all of those sorts of things have really been struck home in this period. And I'm hoping that, I don't want to call it the laziness, but the easy model of just the way recruitment has been done over the last 10 years will probably adjust, and people know that they need to actually add a lot more value to an organisation rather than being the fastest on the phone to say, have you got any job orders? And that's everything. I mean, that's compliance about putting temps and contractors in. It's value adding when you're putting permanents in. It's about having great connections with the talent pool that you're trying to place. It's about really understanding your client's business so that you can add value in those conversations. And I mean, that doesn't sound very revolutionary, does it? But so much of the recruitment industry doesn't do that. And so, I do see that those organisations that get their business much more organised and concentrate as much on the business as they do on the actual task, which is recruitment, will do better. And so maybe the learning out of this is that models do change, and you need to be actually constantly trying to reinvent yourself and not saying, well, we're making money so we can't touch ourselves. And that's everything from commission structures, to my favorite, commission structures, to the business model of how you're approaching clients, to everything else. I mean, in some ways people were too slow to react. The use of technology, all of that stuff was very, very slow in the last 10 years. And people probably realize they need to push much harder on that and constantly be reinventing themselves to what the clients want.
It's definitely going to make us as an industry leaner, meaner, fitter and faster. And I think another thing that I'm seeing is I've been amazed at how many recruitment businesses seemingly are just burying their head in the sand during this time and just pulling the duvet or the doona, as you call it, over their heads and just kind of praying and waiting for it to pass. And they're not using this opportunity to look in the mirror and have a bloody good think about how they can improve and how they can best prepare for the bounce back and what they need to tweak. And it almost suggests that when the market turns, they'll just come out doing the same old thing.
Yep. And I think they're going to realize they're a mile or two behind everybody else. So, Greg Savage and others have been really, really good at pushing information out there and saying, if you think this is a time to go to the beach and go on holidays and renovate your house, well, you are sadly mistaken. It is not the right time. And I think there needs to be equal focus internally. What is your business and how are you doing it? And what can I improve? And what's our model? And have we got our leadership team in place? And how are we going to attract and reward people and motivate people going forward? The other side is what can I learn about my clients? What do my clients want? How can I go and talk to them now without, giving forward, not asking for jobs or anything, but how can I help my clients today and build relationships and understand more about them. And if you split your time into those two tasks, you will be so significantly better when you come out. And you'll be ahead of the pack. I mean, I don't know if I've said it already, but I think corporate knowledge and corporate learnings go for about 5 years. And so, you know, one thing in 2025, we'll have all forgotten that we were in a pandemic and everybody will be doing the same dumb things they were doing previously. Okay, they'll be overpaying their staff. They'll be, you know, all of those things will be happening, and they won't be building robust businesses because they'll have forgotten.
Yeah.
So get it in place now, because
it's so true. It's so true.
You've got to go forward. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Rod. I hope this has been invaluable. I hope there are some new business owners and some new startups who've listened to, some existing startups who've listened to some of these pointers and said, actually, you know what, I need to do that. Get them in place before the next downturn. How often do we have to go through these things, Rod? Is it every 7 years?
No. Well, I do think that those things are changing. I mean, the way the world is becoming, you know, much more connected, and I mean that in every sense, you know, supply chains and everything else, then I think it's really hard to predict anything out in the future. But after 5 years, you should be nervous because you'll be a better business owner.
Yeah.
And there's some great resources out there. I mean, but if you're a business owner, you need to build great networks as a business owner. You need to, you know, get external advice, know who your friends are, know who you can go and talk to, know what you're not good at, as we talked about before, all of those sorts of things. But there are brilliant resources out there, and you just need to lift your head probably more often than people currently do, and make sure that you get good advice and listen to podcasts and do all of those sorts of things, because you'll always be improving yourself.
Okay, Rod. Well, sir, well, thank you so much. We are in it. It's going to be a fascinating next 6 to 9 months, isn't it?
It is.
It is actually going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out.
And we all need to stay positive, because it is going to be a grind. I mean, the rest of 2020 is going to be just plain hard work, I think. And so we all need to stay positive and help each other and get through it as an industry.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, look, if things are still tough in April, beyond the deadline that you promised us, can I give you a call and have a word in your ear?
Certainly will.
Rod, thank you so much for being involved. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Pete.
Take care. All the best.